This is the Talkin Bout the Hoosiers podcast, presented by HoosierIllustrated.com.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to episode 12 of the Talking About the Hoosiers podcast, presented by HoosierIllustrated.com. I'm joined by Kyler Staley. I'm Drew Rosenberg. Kyler, we're already at episode 12. It feels like it's going by really fast at this point.
Yeah, we're pumping it out. 12 episodes in. We're gonna really, hopefully we can pick up the pace a little bit. We've been doing probably one every other week so far, but I think honestly right now that's probably a good pace and everything. So with three of us, it's usually hard to coordinate. Right now it's just us two with Alec. He's on the road for some business stuff with his full-time gig. So it's basketball season is in December. Personally, it's one of my favorite, months of basketball. You wrap up the non-conference play. And then, obviously the start of the year is you get right back into conference play, and then that's when things really, really pick up. But it's an exciting time and everything. I know a lot of kids right now, like yourself, are wrapping up finals and everything. So I hope everything's going well with you on that one.
Yeah, just getting through the grind. I mean, last time we talked, it was Indiana just played in the Empire Classic. We've seen this team play 4 times since then. They handled Harvard and Indianapolis. And then we mentioned it. They had a very important 4-game stretch. We're 3 games into the stretch, 2-1, and we're going to start with the Big Ten games. First game started off with a good win against Maryland at home, beat Maryland by 12, and then went on the road and beat Michigan by 3. 2 very good wins for Indiana. I guess what did you kind of see from there, Kyler? What did you like from the Hoosiers in those 2 games?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, when you start off, it doesn't really matter who your opponent is in a conference setting. I know Maryland and Michigan, on paper right now, aren't the best Big Ten teams right now, aren't even in the top tier at all. But anytime you can start off 2-0 in the Big Ten or any conference, if you're any college team, you take that all the time, and especially when one of them's a road win. You don't take road wins for granted at all, especially in conference play, especially in the Big Ten. And at Michigan, which is typically it is a harder place to play at times. Indiana, we'll start with the Maryland game. Indiana, controlled the tempo, controlled the pace for about 3/4 of that game. Really started off hot. I remember going back. It was one of the best atmospheres I can remember in a long, long time. Probably dating back to last year, honestly, when you look at the Purdue game or the North Carolina game, the atmosphere was just really, really good. And obviously that day we had the hire of Coach Signetti for the football side of things. And I think that brought a lot of juice in the arena. But, the fans were really, really hot that day. I would say Indiana really started off hot. Obviously, when you get to probably about the 10-minute mark, I would say probably in the second half, that's when things started to get a little rocky. Indiana was a little lackadaisical at times, a little careless with the ball. Thought they had the game won, but Maryland made a push a little bit, but they took care of business. And then when you go on the road to Michigan, obviously Michigan has been kind of a rocky team to start off. Been up and down. Didn't really know what to expect. They're a great shooting team. They got some athletes. They got a good backcourt. Is one of the more highly athletic, teams, I would say, in the Big Ten. So you were curious to see, how Indiana was going to match up with them. And honestly, they took care of business, and they really did. I don't know if control the tempo, control the pace of the games is the right word, but Indiana had a response to any type of run that Michigan had, any type of punch they win. I feel like the last 7 to 8 minutes of the game they were just trading buckets back and forth. And then you get down to the stretch, Mike Woodson coached a really good game there. And he got the ball to his bigs. He got the ball to Malik and Kalel. Those guys really played well together, and obviously, they made plays happen. And then they got the defensive stops that they needed down the stretch. So when you start off 2-0 in the Big Ten, that's a good advantage right off the bat. Things are going to get a lot tougher. Indiana's going to face some of the top teams in the conference sooner than later. So we'll see how they respond to that, but once they go back into the conference play, they have a good building block to continue to build on. So, you got to give major props to Indiana for, getting those 2 wins and starting off the 4-game stretch on a high note there. So we'll see when conference play picks up. You see if the Hoosier can continue to can build that momentum still.
Yeah, one thing I really liked going to the Michigan game, Indiana's guards had kind of struggled to defend the ball, especially without Xavier Johnson. And defending the 3-point line has been kind of a recurring theme this year. Michigan with Doug McDaniel, smaller guard, but super shifty, super quick, athletic guy who has been the best scorer on the Michigan team all year. Held him 3 for 14 and 0 for 4 from 3. Gabe Cupps, CJ Gunn, Trey Galloway, all mixed in guarding him at points, and they did a terrific job really stopping him. And it's a big reason why they were able to beat Michigan, because that team really goes where Doug goes. And when he had a bad game like that, it really threw off the flow for them. So for those guards stepping up in a big moment like that on the defensive end was really important for this team.
Absolutely, it was. With Xavier Johnson being out these last, I would say 3.5 games. I know he missed the entire second half of the Harvard game. So, Indiana's been out, been without their captain, their lead guy on the team. And those guards have really stepped up. And you go back to the Michigan game. Gabe Cupps, you mentioned it. He did a good job on Doug McDaniel. And then CJ Gunn coming off the bench had his best game as a Hoosier so far in his 2 years at Indiana. Was just impressive to watch. And then Trey Galloway was making senior plays down the stretch there. And he was playing well on the defensive end as well. So Indiana only had 3 guards that game. And they did a good job. And then one thing I totally forgot to mention, that bench play at the Michigan game. I forget how many points they scored, but it was near half of what Indiana's total points were, if I remember correctly. But the bench rotation was really, really sharp that game. Anthony Walker, Peyton Sparks, Caleb Banks, and CJ Gunn. I think Mike Woodson only ran with 9 players that game. Those guys really stepped up, and I think they all at least had 2 or 3 buckets apiece. So, especially when you go into the front court, looking at Anthony Walker, I feel like we got to give major props to him. He's been playing really, really well for this Indiana team, and he's been one of the more consistent bench players, arguably the most consistent bench player for Indiana this year. He comes in, he's that Swiss Army knife, he's a savvy vet. He's going to make the right plays at the right time. He's not the best shooter, but I think Mike Woodson's always going to encourage someone like that with that skill to shoot the ball if he's got a wide open look. So he's really good at cleaning up the glass, especially on the offensive end. I feel like he's always there trailing, the rebound and everything. But I think a lot of people have said this before, and I'm going to say it again. I think he is what Indiana always wanted Jordan Geronimo to be. Jordan Geronimo's big thing was he was a super athlete. He'll make those highlight reel dunks. He'll make those highlight reel plays and really show a lot of that flash. But Jordan Geronimo just never really became a basketball player. And I think Anthony Walker is that. Jordan Geronimo probably a little bit more athletic than what Anthony Walker is, but Anthony Walker could do a lot more, and his IQ is a little bit better as well. So you got to give it up for the bench rotation there. They really stepped up when they needed to, and the guards stepped up in that game. I don't know if we can say the same. We're getting ready to talk about the Auburn game, but it's kind of showing Indiana really does need Xavier Johnson. But that was a good shine of light there, I would say.
Yeah, you mentioned. They scored 28 points between Banks, Sparks, Walker, and Gunn. Shot 11 for 18 from the field between the 4 of them. 2 for 3 from 3. All 3 attempts were Gunn, and 4 or 5 from the free throw line. It was really just the most complete performance we've seen from the bench all season. And the way Woodson wants to play, he has mentioned it. He has rotated the same all season. He wants the bench to play. He wants them to have a role. He wants to play 10 deep in theory. And I believe every single game that Woodson has had the top 10 guys active, all 10 guys have played. So it just kind of shows that he really doesn't want to shorten the bench where other coaches tend to lean and want to end up with a 7-8 man rotation. Woodson is sticking with the 10-man rotation as of now.
Yeah, no, he wants to. I would say, especially at the start of games, he wants to get 10 guys on the floor, 9 to 10 guys, on the floor if he can. When Xavier Johnson's healthy, he's probably going to play 10 guys. But Mike Woodson down the stretch, he will. He has shown at times where he will shorten the bench. I remember a lot of times last year where he did. There was a lot of close games last year. There's been a lot of close games this year, and he will shorten the bench, down the stretch. But at least at the beginning of games, as we saw in the Auburn game that we'll get to, he wants to play those guys quick, and he wants to get them on the floor. He really does trust his bench. It was a little worrisome at first at the start of the season after the 2 exhibition games where the bench did show a lot of promise. Excuse me, but they They've really stepped up, I would say, in the stretch that Indiana's been on ever since the Louisville game. The bench has really, really stepped up. Caleb Banks is coming in, and he's playing with a high energy, and he's making plays happen. More often than not, he's been a really good player on the floor, especially when it comes to rebounding and defending. That's what he does really, really well, and he just brings energy. He's the spark player off the bench that Indiana needs. So, and then obviously Peyton Sparks coming in and just doing his job, doing his role, being that rebounder. He's just going to be physical down low. He's going to rebound. He's going to defend. So the good thing about the bench players is I think they all know what their role is, and they play it pretty well.
Yeah, I mean, I guess this is the perfect segue into the Auburn game.
Talking about the bench.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, we do. For those who didn't see Indiana on the national stage, got embarrassed. I mean, a 28-point loss. But it didn't really feel like that at the start of the game. Indiana came out, took a 22-10 lead, hit 4 threes in the opening minutes, which was something we hadn't seen. And Baco hit 2, Ware hit 1, I believe Cups hit 1 too.
Yep.
And it was really seemed like, wow, maybe something might be turning with this team. And then Woodson went to the bench, and it kind of fell apart. Auburn went on a huge run. I think it was 19-1, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, something like that. Yep.
Auburn took control of the game and pretty much never looked back at that point. Indiana, they lost by 28 points. They were down 18 at the half after being up by 12 earlier in that half. It was just a really ugly performance after that opening minutes. What did you kind of see, Kyler, from that game? You were there.
Yeah, I was there in person. It is definitely, I've had a few days to really think about that. It's definitely one of the weirdest games I think I've ever been to. Just for the sure fact, you mentioned it. Indiana had their best start of the season by far. They started off the game 3 for 3 from behind the arc. That's so impressive for a team that has not shown any 3-point shooting whatsoever this season. Gabe Cubs hit his first shot. That set the tone a little bit. Then you got followed that with, I think it was Mackenzie Mbako and then Khalil Ware. Those guys started off hot, eventually got the lead up to 12. In the atmosphere there was just great. It was probably half and half, probably half Auburn fans, half Indiana fans. We all know how well Indiana fans travel, and obviously Auburn's pretty close there. So not a far drive at all for them. But really weird. So basically you get to a media timeout, or close to that, I would say, probably around 10, 11, 12 marks, somewhere in that area. Mike Woodson decides to go to his bench, and he takes a collective group out. I think it was both front court guys and Malik and Khalil, and I think Mackenzie and Baco as well. After that, the tides had just changed drastically. It just almost seemed like as soon as those guys hit the bench, you could physically see air coming out of a balloon there. Auburn's a really good coach team. Obviously, we know how good Bruce Pearl is. He always has his guys ready to compete. They're a tough, physical, athletic team. They're in the SEC. They're always going to be that way. They saw those guys come out, and they immediately took advantage of that. Their defense was really aggressive from the start. Indiana, there was no easy buckets. The buckets that Indiana did get, there was no easy buckets given. Those guys were in your face. They were being physical. They were making you score through contact. They really made Indiana work on the offensive end. But once those guys, Indiana's arguably their best 3 players as of late, hit the bench up 12, I mean, it was just blood in the water, and, Auburn was the shark there. So they took advantage. They turned up the pressure, especially in the full court press. I mean, I'm really surprised there wasn't any of these called, but I was really, really concerned that Indiana was going to get multiple 5-second calls on the inbounds once they turned up the press. There, it was really a grind to get open and get the ball there. So you got to give a lot of credit to Auburn there to just make an adjustment. And, I'm pretty confident to say right now that Mike Woodson got out coached that game. We just gave him compliments. Mike Woodson usually in his 3 years of been here, he usually has proven that he can out coach any coach that he's played. But in this situation, in the middle of the game, Auburn made the adjustment that they needed to make. And plus you throw in the fact they were shooting the lights out of the ball. They were making tough shots. It was probably, even Bruce Pearl will say this, and I think he did say it. It was the best shooting performance, the best offensive performance, best overall performance that they've had all season. And Auburn has been a team that's been a little rocky. They lost to App State, which is not a good, loss at all. But they really adjusted, and they really just, they took over that game. and that was their game. And then Indiana, had a little bit of run. I think they cut the lead to 11 in the second half. But they just ran out of gas at that end, at that point in time. And Khalil Ware, probably his worst game, I would say, he's played so far this year. He had a few shots at the beginning. It just honestly, he didn't look like he was mentally there.
No.
I know there was a lot of guys that were on the questionable report. I think there was a sickness going around. So, obviously you don't want to use that as an excuse. That's probably a really lame excuse. But, if you're sick and your mental, in your mentals, you're just not there. You're going to have a rough time, especially with a team that wants to, beat up on you and just make you score through contact. And that's not what Khalil is right now. That's more of what Malik is, as far as playing through contact. But you also, to that point, we did compliment the guards, that Indiana had, in the Michigan game. You really saw that they really needed Xavier Johnson this game. Yeah. There was that, I don't know what you'd call it, but that little thing going around where, people, the Indiana fans, obviously is all over social media questioning if Indiana is better without Xavier Johnson, because they were showing, a lot of improvement in that area before this Auburn game. And I think they got the answer pretty quickly there. Indiana is not better without Xavier Johnson. You need a guy like that needs to be on the ball. That's going to be aggressive. It's going to be that pest on defense. They really, really needed that, especially in a game like that, because if Auburn was going to do that, especially in their backcourt defense, Indiana needed a guy like that as well to, replicate that, give them a receipt of their own. But, it was a very frustrating loss. I feel like the Indiana fan base were very, very frustrated because, at this point, Mike Woodson and the Indiana basketball program have done a really good job of scheduling these type of national level games, but Indiana has really struggled to perform there. You go back to the Kansas game last year, you go back to the Vegas game last year, which I feel like this game was very, very similar in that regards. Indiana just didn't show up, and that's been a constant theme, with these neutral site games that Indiana's in. But, it is frustrating to watch, but obviously Indiana's got a major chance to bounce back this weekend with Kansas. And I know we'll talk about that here soon, but it's just one of those games where you really got to watch film. And honestly, I feel like this was a game that Indiana really needed. Honestly, they really needed to get punched in the mouth, because they honestly, if you look at the wins, they have just been skating by a little bit. So obviously you can learn a lot from this game and prove, they have a lot to prove right now, especially on the national stage right now, because I feel like the national media is kind of right, what Indiana was at this point in time. So they got a lot of fix. This Indiana team's a really tough team to figure out right now. They show a lot of flashes, and they still look like they're improving in some ways. But, obviously the 3 steps that they had moving forward, it felt like this game, it was 4 steps back. So we'll see what they can do, can learn from this game, but obviously just not a pretty game whatsoever.
Yeah, I think when you look at the game, especially watching it for me, I mean, it felt like Indiana got out tough.
Yeah.
Auburn came in with the physicality, and Indiana responded to it in the early part of the game, but they were settling for jump shots. I mean, when have we seen this Indiana team take 4 threes in a short period of time, much less the first 5 minutes of a ball game?
Never. Honestly,
and
not this season.
I think when the Indiana came out like that, looking for the 3 ball more than they really have been, I think it should have been a tell. This team, I mean, they came in, they weren't ready. Auburn wasn't the bigger team, but they came in with an edge about them. They were playing SEC physical basketball, ready to go at Indiana, and Indiana kind of seemed to back down, especially when that big run after Indiana had a lead a 10-point or 12-point lead that turned into a 7-point deficit. Kind of after that, it seemed like they just, laid down and let Auburn walk all over them. It was really just a tough game. Indiana just seemed to have no answer for the physicality Auburn brought in the press, in the half-court offense, and Indiana settled for jump shots. I mean, they took a season-high 17 threes, and I think a lot of that was because they were scared to go to the paint, because every time they got to the paint, they were getting battered, and it just wasn't working.
No, it wasn't working. And honestly, that just goes to show you can't just be a post team. What Indiana is right now. I mean, honestly, it is what it is. They throw the ball to either Malik or Khalil, let those guys work. And then that's about it with this offense. So it showed you got to be well balanced on the offensive end, and especially you use the word tough. That's exactly what this game, kind of centers around, toughness. And Indiana didn't show that. earlier this season. I know it's only been about 8-9 games, something like that. There were times that Indiana did show their toughness. Michigan, I think they showed their toughness. Louisville, they showed a lot of toughness as well. Especially Maryland, they were the toughest team, on the floor the whole entire time. But this one was really frustrating because, like you said, once Auburn, threw another punch back at Indiana just laid there and they just let the 10 count happen at that point. So it just goes to show you that they do have to improve their toughness. They have to get tough, especially this weekend. Kansas is a team that's going to come in. They have an edge to them. They have a lot of confidence. Bill Self has a confident team year in and year out. They're not going to be intimidated by the atmosphere of Assembly Hall whatsoever. So Indiana's got to be ready to fight. It's very important for Indiana to throw the first punch like they have the past few games, but they got to maintain it and they just got to continue to fight, throughout the game. Good teams go on a run. Basketball is a game of runs. It's too bad Indiana honestly just didn't have, any runs left in them once Auburn got on theirs.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you kind of segued it perfectly. I mean, Indiana really I'd argue it was their worst performance of the season. UConn was a bad loss against a good team, but I just think the way they lost to Auburn was just a lot worse. And now you take on Kansas in less than 5 days on Saturday at Assembly Hall. It's the perfect chance for Indiana to bounce back, because if they bounce back and can beat Kansas, who is currently the number 2 team in the country, now you have the signature win they haven't really had all year, and you kind of prove you can hang with these guys. So I guess might as well jump into Kansas. Kyler, I mean, you look at Kansas, they're 9-1. They're, super talented. They've beaten Kentucky. Their only loss was to Marquette. They've beaten Tennessee. They've beaten the UConn team that beat Indiana. I mean, what do you kind of see from Kansas? They're led by Kevin McCullough, KJ Adams, obviously Hunter Dickinson, who we're very familiar with, former Michigan man. What does Indiana, I guess, need to do to beat Kansas on Saturday?
Yeah, obviously, this is the biggest game of the year for Indiana. This will be the best team that they play, other than Purdue. You would make that argument as well, but this will be the best team that they play all season long. And it's getting crunch time for Indiana. You touched on it a little bit. Their opportunity to have a resume good signature win heading into conference play, this is the last chance right now. So if Indiana were to lose this one, you go into a conference play where you pretty much have to dominate the conference. And honestly, the way the Big Ten's looking like, it's not going to be it's not going to be the Big Ten that we've seen over the past, 8 years or so, where you've got just pretty much top to bottom ranked teams left and right. So obviously you've got to go in and you've got to win games that you're supposed to win, and you got to upset a lot of teams as well. But Kansas is going to come in and they're going to compete. The atmosphere is going to be really crazy. Obviously, it's going to be deafening. Honestly, I feel like I'm going to come out of that game with a headache. It's going to be very similar to what North Carolina was last year. Indiana's got an opportunity here, but the things that they need to do, obviously, it starts with toughness. We mentioned that before. They just got to be a tough team. And Mike Woodson even mentioned that on his radio show. He's going to, this whole week in practice, he's going to preach toughness to this team. You got to do that. And then obviously, that I feel like Khalil and Malik, they're going to bounce back from this game. They've been the most consistent piece of this Indiana team. I don't expect them to have back-to-back games where they don't really show up. I think they're going to compete, with Hunter Dickinson. Indiana fans, they don't find Hunter Dickinson very amusing at all. So obviously, we remember the battles that TJD and Dickinson had, with Indiana and Michigan over the past few years. It was great basketball, and he loves playing the villain, so he's obviously going to get the fans riled up there. But I think the key right now for Indiana is, especially in this game, is the guard play. It really is. Those guards have got to step up. They've got to play smart. I feel like it is getting frustrating to watch Trey Galloway right now. And I really just don't want to throw a bunch of weight on his shoulders at this point, but he is a senior guard in this team. With Xavier Johnson down, people look to him to be the leader of this team. And you always really need your leader to come out of the backcourt, especially in a game setting like this. So I would hope that he's going to step up to the challenge here. They really need him. We don't know what the health of Xavier Johnson is. I know there was hope, dating back to the Maryland game, that he was going to be back by Kansas, but obviously you got to evaluate things, throughout this week, and we'll see if, he shows up in warmups or something like that. So we obviously won't know until game time there, but that'll be a big help. and Indiana needs that, honestly, and you just got to look at the bench, honestly, and then those guys have got to step up and they've got to play. But another thing that I'm looking at too is coaching wise. I'm curious to see what type of rotation Mike Woodson has in this game. So, the big knock on him was the rotation with Auburn, when you took your top 3 players out, and then when you're up 12, and then you just kind of rest them for way too long. I'm hoping that you can be a little bit more strategic moving forward, and I hope this is kind of a lesson learned. Honestly, if you're Mike Woodson, you've got to ride the hot hand when you're playing good teams like in Auburn's or Kansas. We'll see how that goes. But it's a big game for Indiana. It's the biggest game of the season. They really need this win. It's a desperate win that they need. And they've got to play like that. They've got to play with a sense of urgency. They've got to play smart, limit the turnovers, and then hopefully get some shots to fall. Be aggressive, especially shooting the 3. I know that they were aggressive versus Auburn, but you got to be a little bit more aggressive here. And hopefully you get some shots to fall there. But it's going to be a challenge. Kansas, they're the number 2 team for a reason. They're a tough team. They've got pieces all over the floor. Hunter Dickinson, KJ Adams, those guys are the real deal. So going to be an exciting game. I think Indiana fans are really, really pumped for this one. They've been pumped for it for about 2 years now. The atmosphere is going to be great. It's going to be a fun game, but we'll see if this Indiana team, this team that, really needs to prove a lot of things on a national level, can really do that this Saturday.
Yeah, 2 things about this game that are kind of interesting. I guess last year Indiana played Kansas on the road at Allen Fieldhouse. That was the game Xavier Johnson broke his foot, ended his season. And after he went down, Indiana got embarrassed there was really no way else to put it. They got embarrassed last year on the road. Tough,
very
tough environment.
It's very similar to the Auburn game, honestly. That's basically how it was.
And now, if Xavier Johnson's able to play, it'd be kind of a revenge game for him, which could be fun. But Kansas has always been the target for him. And if he's not ready for Kansas, I wonder if with some of the non-conference games against some group of 5 mid-majors, if Woodson rests him a little deeper, close, and brings him back closer to the Big Ten, restart of the Big Ten schedule. But the other thing that I think is kind of funny is Hunter Dickinson actually spoke quite a bit about Assembly Hall in Indiana this offseason after coming to Kansas on a podcast with Full Ride Network founder Ant Wright, and then Kansas insider Mike Vernon. He kind of had some fun quotes about Indiana, talking about he couldn't wait to go back to Indiana. Playing in Assembly Hall is crazy. I love the atmosphere. And then kind of just talking about Big Ten teams, I feel like most Big Ten teams hate me. I play with a lot of passion, and it's kind of hard to accept when I'm getting a lot of buckets on your team and letting you know it. I've grown so accustomed to the role now where you can't really faze me as an opposing crowd. Dickinson knows Indiana fans are, let's call it how it is, Indiana fans are crazy. They're going to talk. There's no student section, but I do know quite a few students are going to be going to this game. So they're going to talk. They're going to let them hear it, and Dickinson is a guy who loves that. So it's going to be, whether Xavier Johnson plays or not, it's going to be a real exciting atmosphere for Indiana basketball on Saturday.
Yeah, no, that was actually really good points. I didn't even picture that this is kind of an Xavier Johnson revenge type of game. So I don't know if revenge is the type of word, but it is a game that I guarantee you he's really circled. He has a lot to prove, and I hope, just for Xavier Johnson's case, I hope that he is back and he can play in this game. So it's going to be a tough game for him. But on the flip side of that, yes, Xavier Johnson could be looking at this as a very, a typical revenge game, but at the same time, he's got to be smart. You always get good X and you get bad X. A lot of times you get the hero ball X that, most of the time doesn't really work out. So hopefully he can be smart, but Indiana needs Xavier Johnson on the floor sooner than later. You do make a good point, with the group of 5 schedule coming up, Indiana's got an easier schedule for the remainder of the calendar year. Until they, restart the Big Ten play. So you could see that if he's not ready for this game, or even if he does play and he's not 100% healthy, it could still happen with them. But if for Indiana's sake, they need him on the floor, especially on the defensive end. And then, like you mentioned, Hunter Dickinson, he knows what he's doing, right? He knows how to get a team riled up. He knows how to get a fan base riled up. So that's obviously one of the key parts there. So, it's going to be a fun one. I know we'll have all 3 of us should be there on Saturday. So we'll have full coverage there and everything. But very, very important game for Indiana. We're going to find out a lot about what this Indiana team's about, toughness level, but honestly, with this tough 4-game stretch, Indiana has a chance to be 3-1, and I think most of us, kind of figured they'd be around the 2-2 range right now. So big opportunity to bounce back. You can wipe away that Auburn loss if they can come out and win this game on Saturday.
Yeah, you mentioned it. We're going to have full coverage, live blog, Twitter, post-game recap, which will be on Spotify and YouTube, game recaps. I mean, everything you could want if you're not able to watch the game or if you just want to follow along while you're watching the game,
Yeah.
Hoosier Illustrated is the spot. As always, for all things IU athletics, follow Indiana_FRN on Twitter, Facebook, and check out the HoosierIllustrated.com website, and make sure to hit subscribe on YouTube and Spotify. Also, make sure you're following me, Kyler, and Alec on Twitter. And as always, thank you for listening to the Talkin Bout the Hoosiers podcast presented by HoosierIllustrated.com. We'll be back next week.